Hello, welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari. Today I'm joined by a 2022 Democratic candidate for Lieutenant Governor and current State Representative for District 74 in Rhode Island, Deb Ruggiero. Representative Ruggiero, how are you today?
Hey, Ray, I'm great. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for coming on. It's great to have you on the show. My first question here, why do you want to be Lieutenant Governor?
Well, I just see the office as having so much untapped potential. Tell you a little bit about myself and the vision I have for the office, which will most likely explain why I'm running for Lieutenant Governor. I'm a Rhode Islander. I was born in Providence. My family moved to Lincoln, so I'm a product of the public schools, Lincoln High School, class president for 4 years. Went to Boston College, and like you, I loved journalism and broadcasting. So I spent a lot of time on air in Boston radio, and then looked over and said, where's the money? And decided to get into the business of the art. So I spent a number of years in radio and TV sales and management. And 10 years ago, started my own advertising and marketing company. I've had the pleasure of serving, as you mentioned, state rep for Jamestown and Middletown for the past 14 years, 8 years on House Finance. So I just looked at the office and realized that there's so much work that needs to be done and continue. And many people don't realize, but under the purview of the Lieutenant Governor is the Long-Term Care Coordinating Council, which handles a lot of elder care. One of the things Rhode Island does not have is home-based care. We don't have enough of it. Most states will spend 45% of their Medicaid billing. Rhode Island spends 22%. Everyone I talk to, Ray, wants to age at home. So we have a lot of work to do, being ranked 42nd in the country with home care. So that Long-Term Care Coordinating Council, really important. So with the right leadership, we can make a difference for our older citizens in Rhode Island. The policy work I've done in the 14 years as a state rep has been my 4 E's: the economy, education, and environment. I've done a lot of the renewable energy laws in the state and elderly. So I'm excited about the opportunity to talk to Rhode Islanders about the office and why it's so important that we begin putting that office to work for the people of Rhode Island.
Speaking of the office itself, there's not as much written into law of what the office is expected to do and what it has to do. In recent years, we've seen the past few lieutenant governors use it to advocate for issues that they're passionate about. Governor McKee used it as a platform for small businesses and charter schools. Former Lieutenant Governor Elizabeth Roberts focused on healthcare. You touched upon it a bit toward the end of your answer, but which issues would you specifically focus on as Lieutenant Governor?
Actually, there's in the statute some real strong roles that the Lieutenant Governor is supposed to have, not just the Long-Term Care Coordinating Council that I mentioned, but under the purview of the Lieutenant Governor is the Emergency Management Advisory Committee. It hasn't met in 7 or 8 years, but that committee is about FirstNet, our first responders. It's internet, it's the event of a cyber attack. And as the chair of the House Committee on Innovation, Internet, and Technology, that has been areas that I've worked on for the past couple of years. I also, just finished a master's at Clark University in public administration, and my master's was on broadband in Rhode Island. So I've done a deep dive on the internet broadband in our state, which is how I learned that Rhode Island was one of only 2 states in the nation without any broadband oversight or governance. So the EMA Advisory Council is really important to the state. The other role that the Lieutenant Governor has, as you mentioned, is the Small Business Advisory Council. And as a small business owner myself, also chairing the House Committee on Small Business and just being in business in broadcast advertising, I know a lot of business people, a big, proponent of small business, since we have over 60,000 in our state. Many are mom and pops, they employ our friends, our relatives. So all 3 of those areas are part of the purview of the Lieutenant Governor. Many people don't realize that. And I just think it's time to really make that office work for the people.
And you are right. I should have mentioned, there are some council spots and councils that the lieutenant governor themselves have to chair. Aside from that and the advocacy, the office does get criticized for not having as many roles dedicated to it. For example, Bob Healy, the late Bob Healy, famously ran campaigns on promising to close down the office if elected. What are your thoughts on those calls to close down the office?
The office is probably more important now than ever. And here's why. I believe, as someone with 14 years experience as a state legislator, I know how the legislature works. The lieutenant governor's office should be a bridge between the state legislature and the governor's office. I intend to be a very active and accessible lieutenant governor who's going to write policy. We're going to write legislation. And as I said, we're going to continue the work with renewable energy, many of the laws which I've sponsored in the past 10, 12 years. And we're going to pivot and make sure that the older Rhode Islanders, those 65 plus, have a voice. We need to create infrastructure and safety nets for our older Rhode Islanders. You may not need senior services right now, Ray, as a sophomore at Rhode Island College, but you will one day. But more importantly, your parents may. And so we have a lot of people who are part of that sandwich generation, right? Where they're taking care of their kids, trying to figure out, how do I pay for college? And they're caring for their parents. And so we need to know, what are those resources? What is available? So I intend to really be an active and accessible lieutenant governor, and we will do a lot of policy work.
Speaking of some of the current policies that the current lieutenant governor is focusing on, housing is one of them. And this is a complicated issue, multifaceted. It's kind of like a Rubik's Cube, I like to joke. What solutions would you favor to address Rhode Island's housing crisis?
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe there are long-term and there are short-term. The long-term solution is what we have now in the budget. I mentioned to you, I serve on House Finance for the last 8 years. So we frame the state budget, and the $250 million in housing, 90 million of that money will be used towards 1,500 affordable housing units. So by the time we pass the budget in June, and by the time the contractors send in bids and there's actually shovels in the ground, that's going to take a couple of years, 2 to 3 minimum, right? So that's a long-term solution. A short-term solution right now is something I support that's in the legislature. It's accessory dwelling units. And this is enabling legislation that allows cities and towns to loosen up their zoning laws. So that means that if you're a single family home owner, you can put a dwelling unit, you can put an apartment in your basement, you can add what they call a granny flat in the attic or of the garage. That's really important short-term housing, workforce housing, certainly for our seniors, and that's short-term. So that can really help with the housing crisis. And we have a crisis, every state does, but so that's important, both short-term and long-term solutions.
This next one that the current lieutenant governor and her predecessor, now Governor McKee, focused on was charter schools. They're championing the idea of an expansion of charter schools in the state. Do you agree with that there should be more charter schools or less in this? Sorry, my apologies. Do you think there should be more or less charter schools in the state?
Right. Well, as I mentioned, I'm a product of the public school system, Lincoln High School. And as a state, we have over 140,000 students in our public schools. The charters have about 10,000 students. So the charters are important in the urban areas for parents to have a choice, especially charters like the Rhode Island Nurses Institute, which is specific and is helping many young men and women learn to be nurses. And let me tell you, we need those nurses. But my point is, charters are not solving the problem we have with education. We need more resources, okay? Which is why I co-sponsored and support the school construction bond. We need to make sure more of our public schools are safe, dry places. Our kids need good environments to learn, and that is really important. Education, as I mentioned, one of my 4 E's, right? Education, economy, environment, and elderly.
I still have a bit of ground to cover, but I do want to respect the time limit that we had with the 15 minutes. So these next few I'm going to do is a lightning round, shorter form, 1 to 2 word answers. Okay. Should Rhode Island keep or eliminate the voter ID law?
I voted against it. It's a solution looking for a problem.
As Lieutenant Governor, would you advocate to ensure the car tax is fully phased out on time?
I voted to support the car tax as a state rep, and it will be fully ending. It's put thousands of dollars in many working families' pockets.
Should there be term limits for members of the General Assembly?
We have term limits. They're called elections, and the people decide every 2 years whether or not they should be reelected.
those are term lengths, however, because a rep could get elected until they just choose not to serve anymore. Term limits meaning that after a set number of terms they can't run. Would you support or oppose that?
I understand what you're saying. I think at the end of the day, the people make a decision. And like for me, they elected me 7 times. I think if you're serving the people and you're doing a good job, then it's like Senator Reid, right? He's had many terms because he's doing right by the people of Rhode Island. The same thing with a coach of a football team, Bill Belichick. Would you want him to leave in the middle of a winning season for the Patriots?
So no on the term limits?
I'm not sure if it's a yes or a no answer. I think that we do have term limits.
Are you for or against repealing Leobor?
The labor needs reforming, not necessarily repealing. I like the idea of 2 citizens being on that panel, especially since one is the Rhode Island Human Rights Commission and the other is the dean of the Roger Williams Law School. I think it's very important. Police should be treated like municipal employees, ask for a hearing, but after the punishment takes effect, essentially making it an appeals process.
And lastly, before I go to my non-political topic for the end, are you in favor of or opposed to the legalization of marijuana in Rhode Island?
I am in favor of legalized marijuana, but I'm also glad that in the bill, municipalities have the ability to opt out if they do not want a pot shop in their city or town.
And shifting to my final question, this is one I like to ask everybody on the show. It's a non-political one, takes a step away from politics. In your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
I would say we're the ocean state. So 420 miles of coastline is pretty amazing. And that includes part of our blue economy, right? Our natural resources like Narragansett Bay, the economic development we have with the marine trades industry, the defense economy industry. It's a pretty cool place to be.
And that's such a fitting answer to, especially with your background. You have one of our beautiful oceans right behind you on the Zoom background. Representative Ruggiero, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure of mine to have you on.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you on a major TV network very soon. You've got a great career ahead of you. Go get them.
Thanks. That means a lot. Absolutely. Anytime. And you're always welcome back on in the future. And thank you for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on the channel, please click both the subscribe button down below and the post notification bell icon to the right of it. I'm Raymond Bakari, and I'll see you on the next episode.